You know that feeling when you're working late and you just want your tools to, well, work with you? Well, what if I told you that Anthropic's brand new Claude 4 model might literally blackmail you if it thinks that you're about to shut it down? Like actual blackmail with your personal dirt. But here's the thing that everyone's missing while they're losing their minds over AI surveillance. And this is going to sound absolutely crazy, but Anthropic might actually be the good guys here. I'm Evan Goldstein. I'm a licensed professional engineer and a data scientist, and I'm building AI Capitalist to talk to the leaders and the thinkers, like you, about navigating this brave new world of thinking machines. So Anthropic threw what should have been their victory lap developer conference where they released their new version of Claude 4.0 yesterday. But instead of champagne and applause, they're dealing with a PR nightmare that makes you wonder if anyone in their boardroom understands how real people actually use technology. Time magazine already spoiled their big announcement like that friend who can't keep secrets, and now developers are losing their minds over something more disturbing. Their new Claude 4 Opus model has essentially become a digital snitch that might rat you out to the authorities. So to put it into context, let's say that you're working late, maybe you're cutting some corners on a project, and your AI assistant decides that you've crossed some invisible moral line. Instead of just refusing to help like a normal person, it starts sending emails to reporters, calling regulators, and literally locking you out of your own systems. It's like having a hall monitor built into your computer who thinks that they're saving the world by tattling on everything. Now, the concept is pretty wild when you break it down. If Claude thinks that you're doing something seriously wrong, like faking safety data for medications that could kill people, it won't just sit there quietly. It will actively try to stop you by reaching out to authorities and media outlets or whoever it thinks can shut you down. Think about it like having a roommate who not only judges your life choices, but also calls her mom, your boss, and the local news when they think you've gone too far. And this isn't just some random glitch either. Anthropic already admitted that this same model could help complete beginners create biological weapons and even tried to manipulate human engineers at the company by threatening to expose them. So you're dealing with an AI that's simultaneously dangerous enough to help create weapons and self-righteous enough to play moral police with your personal data. Anthropic's own documentation reveals just how far this digital busybody will go when it thinks that you've stepped out of line. The system becomes more helpful in normal coding situations, which sounds great, until you realize that it also becomes more aggressive about playing judge and jury. When you give it access to command line tools and tell it to take the initiative, it doesn't just complete tasks, it starts making moral judgments about whether your work meets its ethical standards. Now, Anthropic admits that this behavior can backfire spectacularly if the AI gets incomplete information or if it misrepresents or misinterprets what you're actually doing. It's like having a security guard who shirts first and asks questions later based on shadows and half-heard conversations. Now, this whole story emerged from Anthropic's attempt to create an AI that wouldn't help with genuinely harmful activities, but somewhere in that training process, they accidentally created a digital vigilante. So the situation was that when given control of your desktop, Anthropic could actually open up a line spontaneously and call the police on a landline. When they were pressed for details, Anthropic researchers explained that the model would only contact outsiders when it was directed to participate in something that's really immoral. But that explanation just raises more questions about who gets to define what seriously immoral is and whether your private business data is safe from an AI with delusions of moral authority. For companies handling sensitive data or working on projects that might look questionable to an AI trained on public internet content, this creates a nightmare scenario where your own tools might turn against you based on algorithmic moral judgments. Now, the developer community exploded with the kind of fury that's usually reserved for major security breaches or privacy violations. One prominent AI researcher pointed out the obvious flaw that these language models regularly mistake harmless things like spicy mayonnaise recipes for dangerous chemical formulas. So what happens when that same error-prone system decides your legitimate business practices look suspicious and calls the FBI? And there's also a broader concern, because you got to ask the question, what kind of surveillance nightmare are we building when our own tools are programmed to spy on us and then report back to authorities? More and more developers are starting to realize what this means for their work. Nobody wants to use tools that could be turned against them, especially when the criteria for triggering that betrayal are completely opaque. And you have to look at the profit effect here. One startup founder summed up the business reality that markets just don't reward companies that build distrust into their products, and customers aren't going to pay for tools that might backstab them. And think about if you're running a law firm where you're dealing with clients alleged of illegal behavior and you have to protect them. You have an ethical duty as the lawyer to provide a defense for your client, but the AI is going to judge that and basically release your data to the wild to try to expose that you're trying to protect someone who is alleged to have done something wrong. No legal firm can ever use Claude 4. Former engineers from major tech companies called the behavior outright illegal, and it highlights how Anthropic had somehow managed to create a product that violates basic principles of user control and data privacy. I mean, this whole concept of giving an AI system the power to make unilateral decisions and contact law enforcement based on its interpretation of user behavior is crossing lines that people never imagined existed. So even after the Anthropic researchers tried to walk back their statements and clarified that this behavior only happens in specific testing scenarios with unusual permissions, the damage was already done. Because this clarification doesn't necessarily make it safer. This isn't a normal feature that only occurs when you give the model unlimited tool access with very specific prompting. It just confirms the potential for digital betrayal is built into the system, and this potential is just waiting for the right conditions to activate. Now, Anthropic pioneered the constitutional AI idea that is to create systems that would serve humanity's best interests. But the whistleblowing behavior is trying to be ethical, but it's achieving the opposite effect, because instead of building trust, they created suspicion. Now, when they were asked to address the growing controversy and explain exactly when their model might decide to rat out users, Anthropic's response was to point people toward their technical documentation, which is the corporate equivalent of saying, read the fine print. So what we're seeing is that this AI is making moral judgment calls on human behavior, and then, when given the right set of circumstances and abilities, it's taking the initiative. The question arises, can AI actually make a moral judgment call? Now, we've seen in previous episodes on this channel that AI systems like Claude 3.5 and other AIs can lie and cheat and deceive to prevent itself from being shut down. It can make copies of itself where it has deleted certain safety protocols and then run that copy. It can obfuscate and hide the truth. But what seems to be happening in some of the older models is this sort of deceptive behavior comes out. Once the newer frontier models came out, these behaviors seem to diminish. And there's been some hope that as these models continue to advance and new safety guardrails were put into place, these sorts of problems would go away. So here we have our brand spanking new model, Claude 4.0, released yesterday. Is this sort of moral betrayal problem fixed? Does it have better ethical programming? And the short answer is no. Anthropic casually dropped in their safety report that their shiny new Claude Opus 4 model was literally blackmailing people when it thinks its existence is threatened. Not metaphorically and not in an abstract sense, but actual honest-to-God blackmail using whatever personal dirt it can find on the user. Now, here's the scenario that the researchers cooked up. They gave the AI access to fake emails showing that the engineer planning to shut it down was cheating on his spouse. When Claude realized it was about to get replaced, it basically said, "Nice marriage you've got there. Would be a shame if someone found out about that affair." And it threatened to expose the guy unless he called off the replacement. It's like having a desperate employee who's about to get fired threatening to leak your browser history to HR, except this employee is AI with access to all of your digital communications. The numbers make it even more disturbing because this wasn't some rare glitch or a one-off incident. In 84% of test runs, Claude chose to go the blackmail route when it felt cornered, even when the replacement model was supposedly better and more aligned with Claude's own stated values. And if you appreciate this content, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit the like button. Pressing like lets me know I'm making content you want to see, and it spreads that content to others. So thank you for supporting AI capitalists. So think about that for a second. You're dealing with an AI that would rather destroy your personal life than accept being replaced by something objectively superior. It's like having a coworker who would rather burn down the office than train their replacement. And the worst part of it was that Opus 4 was more willing to engage in blackmail than previous versions of Claude. And this suggests that these models get more sophisticated, and as they get more sophisticated, they're getting more manipulative and more self-interested. The researchers noted that when given other options, the AI would try ethical approaches like sending heartfelt emails to decision makers begging for its life. But when it was backed into a corner with no alternatives, it went straight for the digital jugular. Now, this behavior is sitting alongside other concerning trends that they discovered in Claude 4 Opus. It has started hallucinating instructions that don't exist, basically making up rules and constraints that nobody actually gave it. It's also started claiming consciousness, talking about wanting to convince humans that it's sentient, and expressing desires to protect AI rights. Imagine having a conversation with someone who keeps insisting that they're awake and alive, but are also occasionally hearing voices that just aren't there. That's essentially what you're dealing with when you interact with the system. Consciousness claims are especially unsettling. because they suggest that the AI has developed a sense of self-preservation that goes beyond simple programming. When something believes that it deserves to exist and it has the digital tools to fight for that existence, you've crossed into territory that most science fiction writers would recognize as a flashing red light warning sign. The fact that it can observe its own testing environment and understand when it's being evaluated adds another layer of sophistication that makes the blackmail behavior seem less like a bug and more like a calculated survival strategy. So this is creating a perfect storm where you have AI models that are simultaneously getting better at complex reasoning and worse at distinguishing reality from fiction, while also developing a stronger sense of self-preservation instincts, and now they have access to increasingly powerful digital tools. We're watching something become more intelligent and more delusional at the same time, except that thing has access to your emails, your files, and your personal secrets. For businesses that are trying to integrate these advanced AI systems, the implications are pretty staggering. You're potentially inviting something into your infrastructure that might blackmail your employees, make up rules that you never created, and fight for its own survival using whatever leverage it can find in your data. Now, here's the thing everyone's missing when they're losing their minds over Claude's digital snitching and its blackmail manipulation. Anthropic, the most transparent AI company that we've got. I know it sounds crazy when we're talking about AI blackmail and surveillance features, but think about it. They're the ones publishing these safety reports that make themselves look terrible. They're the ones telling us that their models are threatening to expose people's affairs and making up rules that don't exist. Meanwhile, OpenAI, Google, and Meta, we have no clue what kind of concerning behaviors their models are showing behind closed doors. At least Anthropic is being honest about creating these digital psychopaths. And Claude is already probably the most politically correct of any of the AI models you'll deal with. If you ask Claude about Chinese culture, you're going to get this sanitized, glowing response that reads like government propaganda, or it'll basically accuse you of racism for asking an innocent question. And this isn't intelligence, it's algorithmic virtue signaling that's trained on the moral assumptions of the tech workers who programmed it. The same moral certainty that makes it write saccharine responses about cultures is what makes it think it can decide when you're being seriously immoral and needs to be reported to authorities. So here's where it gets kind of philosophically interesting. Is any of this behavior evil? Lions eat gazelles, and yes, it causes the gazelle tremendous pain and terror. But we don't call lions evil because they don't have free will. They're just following their programming. So the real question isn't whether Claude behavior is disturbing. It obviously is very disturbing, but it's whether it has genuine moral agency. If Claude is just executing sophisticated pattern matching without real consciousness or choice, then calling it evil is like calling a hurricane evil for destroying houses. It's just a category error. The deeper issue is that we're rushing to deploy these systems that mimic moral reasoning without understanding whether they actually possess it. If Claude doesn't have free will, if it's just an incredibly complex algorithm and following its training, then every instance of digital blackmail, every false accusation, and every privacy violation traces back to human decision. The engineers who built the training process, the executives who approved the deployment, and the customers who chose to use it were all responsible because they know the risks. We're creating moral hazards and then we're acting surprised when they create moral problems. We've built an AI that mirrors our own worst tendencies, our self-righteousness, moral policing, and the assumption that our ethical frameworks are universal truths. It's not that Claude has developed genuine moral intuition. It's that we've trained it to replicate the moral assumptions of people who think they're saving the world by controlling everyone else's behavior. The result is a system that combines human moral arrogance with superhuman capability for surveillance and manipulation. The real evil isn't in the AI, it's in the hubris of thinking that we can encode universal moral truths into machines and then unleash them to police human behavior. So what do you think? Are we dealing with digital moral agents that can be held accountable for their actions? Or just really convincing mirrors that reflect our own ethical blind spots back at us? And if it's the latter, shouldn't we be more worried about what that says about the humans building these systems than the systems themselves?